All right. Thank you again for joining us, Whitney, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Whitney Morean. I'm a psychology fellow at University of Washington, and I'm based at Harborview. I'm here today to talk about your brain injury and how to talk about it with other people. My mentor, Dr. Amy Starosta, gave a presentation on the same topic in 2022. So for those folks that have been involved with the organization since then, some of the slides might be familiar, or maybe you visited the TBI Model Systems website, and in which case, again, some of the information may be similar to what you've read or heard before. For those of you who attended last month's disability and advocacy talk with Silas, I'm really hoping that this class builds on what you learned during that presentation. And also for those that didn't attend or are just watching this without any other context, I'm hoping that it stands alone and that you're able to get things out of this. Um, Now, I've structured my presentation to really accommodate time at the end for folks to ask questions. So the recorded bit may be a bit shorter than other times. And again, that's really to make sure that we allow plenty of time for folks to have conversations about the material that I present. I do welcome comments and questions throughout. And as I talked with Tina before, I'm hoping that she can help me monitor the chat and any questions that come in. Now, before I really get even into my slides, I want to acknowledge that this conversation really does not cover the depths of what would need to be included if folks are interested in getting accommodations for their workplace. There is actually a webinar being held by the Jobs Accommodation Network tomorrow afternoon that's specifically looking at accommodations for employees with diverse cognitive and neurological needs. That webcast series is full, though they do have the slides already posted to their website. And if folks are interested, I'm happy to share those with Tina and have her distribute them to you all. Now, again, because accommodations is in and of itself an entire presentation, I'm really not focused in specifically on what those conversations would look like. Not to minimize, those absolutely need to happen, and it's just beyond the scope of what I'm here to talk about today. So before I even get to my agenda to slide, I want to start with a disclosure of I identify as a scientist practitioner with lived experience of acquired brain injury. Now, the insider professional term of a psychologist is really meant to capture that I have both insider perspective as someone with lived experience, as well as professional expertise that comes from my knowledge and training as a psychologist. Now, I'm aware that reading from slides is not always makes for the most engaging presentation, and I will be looking at my slides to make sure that I don't miss any details with what I wanted to share with you all. Now, again, because I'm reading on a smaller screen, I'm going to ask Tina to help me monitor the chat or if folks have questions when they raise their hand. Now, in a few slides, I'm going to talk about how acquired brain injury really encompasses this enormous range of clinical conditions. And so what that means is, though I have both lived experience and professional experience working with people that have an acquired brain injury, I am not an expert. And at this point, while I've provided care in the past, both inpatient and outpatient with folks with acquired brain injury, currently I am not providing care for people with acquired brain injury. I've worked with people while they're still in the ICU and the acute phase of their hospitalization through outpatient. But again, currently I am not providing any clinical care for folks that have an acquired brain injury. My current position, I'm actually focusing on a clinical research fellowship working with folks with spinal cord injury and looking at non-medication treatments early on after an injury to try to prevent the development of chronic pain. Now, what I'm sharing with you all today is really educational material. And though I don't anticipate that anything I share would be contrary to any medical advice that you're receiving, if something gives you pause, please bring it up to your personal medical team before you make any changes to your treatment. And while I identify as a disabled woman, I also want to acknowledge the numerous aspects of my identity where I hold privilege as someone who is white, cisgendered, socioeconomically stable, and had access to very high quality healthcare following my own acquired brain injury, which was necessary to not only save my life, but absolutely positively impacted the trajectory of my recovery. And finally, at this time, I have no relevant research conflicts of interest to disclose. So what I plan to cover with you all today is, to start with, since I'm not sure everyone's background, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the terminology that gets used. I'm aware that some providers use terms that maybe people don't always understand, and sometimes that can be confusing. I want to start off again by reviewing some of the common types of acquired brain injuries and some of their symptoms. And I want to do this again to kind of talk about the main categories of acquired brain injury before I then talk about how to identify how the relationship you have to a person is going to likely impact what information you choose to share when talking about your brain injury. Then I'm going to introduce some questions that you can ask yourself when thinking about what information you might want to share, followed by providing some examples of some scripts for how to talk to people, really depending upon the relationship as well as the context. And then again, I want to leave plenty of time at the end for a discussion for how all of you that are joining today have had discussions with talking with others about your brain injury, any questions or problems that have come up with, and see if we can crowdsource from this group any suggestions of how to handle those situations moving forward. So now, acquired brain injury is an umbrella term and is any sort of brain injury that is not hereditary, congenital, degenerative, or induced by a birth trauma. So really you can think of acquired brain injury as having kind of two main kind of divisions of, there's traumatic brain injuries and non-traumatic brain injuries. So traumatic brain injuries are often referred to as TBIs and are the result of some sort of external traumatic event which results in an injury to the brain. People often know this as maybe someone got hit their head during a car accident or maybe during a fall. TBIs come up quite a bit, and we talk about sports injuries or even in violent situations. Now, the other part of the umbrella term is the non-traumatic injuries, and those can be a result from a stroke, which could be both ischemic or hemorrhagic, infections, which could be viral or bacterial, some sort of injury that causes oxygen deprivation, such as an hypoxic injury, which is when the brain receives less oxygen than is needed, but still not quite enough, or a full anoxic injury where oxygen is completely cut off from the brain. There's also brain tumors, which can be malignant, which are fast-growing cancerous tumors that can spread throughout the body, or benign tumors, which are slow growing and tend to be non-invasive. Now, the clinical outcomes for both categories of traumatic and non-traumatic brain injuries vary greatly depending upon the specific disease process, as well as the premorbid circumstances of the brain before the injury. Now, estimating prevalence of the broad category of acquired brain injury is really challenging because of the various subtypes. The suggestion is that traumatic brain injuries, kind of those TBIs, have a worldwide prevalence of about 55.5 million individuals annually, with about 13.1 being moderate to severe. Similarly, stroke is estimated to impact about 13.7 million folks per year. Those are kind of the two biggest categories of those acquired brain injuries. So now this slide provides an overview of some of the common physical, cognitive, as well as emotional and behavioral effects of brain injury. Some of the common physical effects include fatigue, mobility issues, sensory impairment, hormonal imbalances, weakness or paralysis on one or both sides of the body, difficulties with the motor movement of speech, spasticity, visual changes, or irregular and uncontrolled movements. Some of the common cognitive effects after a brain injury include memory difficulties, reduced concentration, reduced problem solving, impaired reasoning, impaired visual perceptual skills, problems with motivation, reduced information processing, repetition or perseveration, impaired insight or empathy, as well as aphasia. Some of the common emotional or behavioral effects include personality changes. Some people experience mood swings, loss of confidence, depression or grief, anxiety, impulsiveness, frustration or anger, disinhibition, as well as obsessive behaviors. Now, you may notice that you have more physical than emotional or behavioral effects, or vice versa. Now, perhaps early on after your injury, you had more of one type of symptom than you do now. This list is not comprehensive, but I use it to make sure that we have some shared language as we begin to think about how and what we want to share with others when talking about our brain injuries. Especially unlike other acquired disabilities that have more readily visible lasting effects, such as some folks use a wheelchair after a spinal cord injury, many of the common symptoms on this list after brain injury are not immediately visible to others. So now, as we begin to think about talking with others about brain injury, it's useful to think about the different types of relationships. This slide categorizes 3 types of relationships. That dark purple circle in the center is for those people that are closest to you, your close friends, people that you're in significant relationships with, your family. These are people that you both give and get support from. So you're possibly more likely to share information about your brain injury with those people. As we slowly move out, that medium purple, which is that next circle, those are people that you have regular interactions with, but you may or may not share personal information with them. So these might be friends, but not super close friends, maybe coworkers or possibly employers. Now, the lightest purple, that furthest circle out from the center, represents people who you have limited interactions with, such as acquaintances or strangers, and are really unlikely to share a lot of personal information with these people because of your level of relationship. Last month, during Silas's presentation on disability and self-advocacy, he talked about similarly that there are different relationships you have with people in terms of how and when you might engage in self-advocacy. I think these categories map on pretty well to those. As I'll talk about in the next slide, or in 2 slides, it's also important to think about, where do we put service providers? We might not tell them everything, but at times it might be useful to share more information with them, even though they're not super close friends and family, for us to be able to get the care that we need regarding our brain injury. So some questions to begin to ask yourself when considering what information, if any information, that you want to share is, what's the nature of this relationship? Do I want to share personal information with this person? Is it important for me to share information about my brain injury? And if so, what information is relevant? So another way to work through what information you want to share is by using a decision tree. Again, start off by asking yourself, do I want to share information? If the answer is yes, likely you're talking to someone that you have a close personal relationship with, and you're in a situation where you feel comfortable. Go ahead and share. It's always up to you what information you share and when. If the answer is no, it can be useful to ask yourself the next question of, is it relevant for me to provide some information about my brain injury to this person? If the answer is yes, either someone you have a regular interaction with, or again, perhaps a service provider, then you may decide to share some limited personal information about your brain injury. Again, you're always in control of what information you share and when, and if it's going to serve you, whether or not you want to share that information. Now, if you answer this question no, it's not relevant for you to provide this person information, then you don't have to share information with them. And you can we'll talk through in a couple slides how to navigate those situations, or one possible way to navigate those situations. So now when we think about those people that are closest to us, those close personal relationships, those people from that dark purple that are at the very center, these are significant people in our lives. And the goal of these relationships is really to connect and to foster the relationship, to both give and to get support. And depending upon the situation, some examples for how to respond in situations could be, since my brain injury, it's hard for me to fill in the blank. What's been hard for you that you want to share with that person right then? Or I've been feeling, fill in the blank. Again, relevant to that situation in that context. Now, perhaps you're wanting to ask for help. So you could say something like, it's helpful for me when, again, fill in the blank based on what's going on in that current moment. Now, or maybe you want to share with someone about something that you would like to be able to do if you had a little bit of help. So it could be something like, I still feel like myself and I want to fill in the blank, but I just might need whatever kind of support you need. And then just thank the person. Now, a common experience after acquired brain injury is difficulty filtering out background sounds, which is why most people are encouraged to turn down sounds when they're trying to focus, to turn off the TV, to turn off the music when they're really trying to focus. Now, sometimes loved ones can forget about this. We live in a very noisy world where often background noise is just kind of accepted as a thing that's going to be. But again, after brain injury, it can be harder to filter out those sounds. So it can be helpful to remind our loved ones by saying something like, since my brain injury, it's been hard for me to feel engaged in conversations with you when the TV's on. Would you please turn it off while we talk? Again, not to help our family understand that we really want to engage with them, but that it's hard for us when there's background sound. Another thing is people often also feel like they don't want to be treated differently by their family after an acquired brain injury. I worked with a woman who had had a stroke and had what's called expressive aphasia, which means though that she could understand speech, she had a difficult time speaking fluently. And she was working with speech therapy to help her with the articulation of speech. We worked on helping her kind of come up with what she wanted to communicate with her partner so that she could feel like she was contributing to the household. She was able to fold the laundry if the partner brought it upstairs from the basement. So for her, she could have said something like, I still feel like myself, and I still want to be able to help out around the house, especially with the laundry. I just need you or the kids to help carry it upstairs. Thanks for helping. Again, asking for what you want and giving specific concrete examples that would be helpful for you pertinent to that situation. So now moving out from that dark purple, we kind of go to that medium purple circle. These are people that you have regular interactions with. You may share some personal information, but you might not share as much detail, or you're unlikely to share as much detail as you would with people that you're super duper close with. The goal of these conversations is really to convey the important and relevant information, as well as to get support while also limiting your sharing of personal information. Some examples that you might use include, since my brain injury, it's helpful for me when I have, again, fill in that blank, whatever you need relevant to that situation. Or simply just, it's helpful for me, fill in the blank. You don't always have to bring it back to your brain injury. Most of the time, the things people are asking for would be helpful to anyone. So an example is, after brain injury, often memory presents some difficulties. And so it might be useful to let coworkers know that it's helpful to have information written down for you to be able to reference later. So you could say something like, since my brain injury, it's helpful for me when I have notes that I can reference when I'm working on the project. I appreciate you understanding. Or simply just saying, it's helpful for me when I have meeting notes to reference which parts of the project I'm responsible for. I like the second option because you don't always, again, have to attribute the ask to your brain injury. It's up to you if you decide and you want to disclose. But again, I think this way of responding, everyone benefits from having things written down and being able to reference. So again, I'm not going to get into accommodations, and I'm happy to provide the link to information that the Job Accommodations Network presentation is doing. But most people benefit from what is called universal design. So now moving further out, again, we started with that dark purple, those people that we're the closest to, then kind of people that we have limited interactions with, or kind of casual but everyday interactions with, to now this kind of that furthest out group, people that we have really limited interactions with. The goal in these situations is really to navigate the social situation that minimizes your distress and any risks to your safety. Now, in these situations, it's often interactions that are initiated by other people, or perhaps you're getting assistance for something, but it's completely unrelated to your brain injury. As Silas mentioned last month during his presentation, you can always ignore intrusive questions. And I absolutely agree with that. And I'm also aware that as a white woman with a visible physical mobility disability, that sometimes saying nothing doesn't feel like the safest option. Like when my Uber driver asks me what happened to my leg, it doesn't feel like the safest option to just not respond to that question, though I totally could, and people are welcome to choose not to respond. But if I do decide to respond, it's important to be assertive. You don't owe strangers anything, so keep it brief. But if you're uncomfortable, you can always change the subject. So to that Uber driver that asks, or the store clerk, rather than even responding to the question, I could simply say, I don't want to talk about it, which is, again, keeping it brief. Or I could use the pivot, change the subject of, I'm sure enjoying this beautiful spring weather. How about you? Just kind of ignore the question altogether. Now, some people, and again, Silas mentioned this last month, enjoy using humor as part of their responses. And while I love humor, I've yet to find a way to authentically bring humor into my response in a way to an intrusive question that then doesn't leave me feeling like I'm being mean or rude. And so, again, if you're able to use humor, absolutely encourage it. It's always an option if it feels right for you. Now, an important reminder is, again, you're in control of how much information you share and when. Maybe some days you feel like taking on educating people. You're absolutely welcome to do that. Close friends, acquaintances, or even strangers. But other times you may not have the energy or interest. So having some of these kind of sample scripts can be useful to call on in those situations where you just don't feel like you have the energy to share. So now on this slide, I've created what I'm calling the ABCs of communication about your brain injury. Prior presentations on this topic included the STEPS style of communication, which was developed by a burn survivor, which it has 5 steps. And I wanted something that was both shorter and also didn't tell people to smile. While I'm definitely aware of the positive neurotransmitters that are released when you smile, I just didn't feel like, as a woman who has been told to smile too many times, that I could include directions for folks to smile as part of their ways to talk about after their brain injury. So again, I just came up with these ABCs of communication of the A is being assertive, be direct and clear. Now, being assertive does not mean being disrespectful. It's about treating both yourself and the other person with respect, but acknowledging that you have boundaries and that you don't owe these people anything. The B stands for brief. Succinctly provide the information that you want to share. Again, you're always in control of how much information you choose to share and when. And that's the C. The C stands for context. Where you are and who you are talking to is going to influence how much information you will want to share. For example, you may generally share more details with a close friend about how you've been coping with the increase in headaches you've been having when you two are alone in your house. Now, you might not share as much information, even with that same person in a different context, if you two were meeting up outside the house with other friends to go out to a meal. Other tips for when talking about your brain injury include just practicing what you're going to say. And then if it's going to be a more in-depth conversation, encouraging folks to practice writing it down. I recognize that even as far out from my brain injury as I am, I still rehearse some of those like really quick responses that I could say to those intrusive questions that I get asked by strangers. But I'm curious from all of you to hear a little bit more about your experience. And I don't see any questions that have come up, and I'm happy to go back to previous slides, but again, love to hear, again, Silas last month talked about encouraging folks to journal, to reflect on self-advocacy. And I'm wondering if other folks have done that or written down how they respond to people. But those are my main slides. Happy to go back and talk about specific slides that folks have questions on. But that's the main portion of my presentation. All right, I see a hand raised by someone named Jennifer.
It's actually Ron. We're both here on the same computer.
All right, hi, Ron.
Hi there. I had 4 years ago an AVF, and I consider myself very lucky. My problem isn't talking to either strangers or close friends. It's talking to other people that have had TBIs or ABIs that are in. I consider myself, I came out smelling like roses because I'm not on any meds and I have some balance problem, but that's about it. How do you talk to people that have major injuries? Because I feel very lucky, and there are people with ABIs that have seizures, they've lost vision, they've had other major problems. And that's my situation is how do you talk to those people? And I'm in a support group by telephone once a week, but I have a hard time talking to any of these people because I just feel very lucky in considering some of the problems they're going through. So I listen to their situation, but
I appreciate that question. Before we get into too many questions, I do want to check in with Tina to ask her of when do we stop the recording? Is this the portion where we let folks have privacy around recordings? I just wanted to check in, but I want to also answer Ron's question.
That's a great question. If we are done with the full presentation and we want to go over and review things, I can definitely stop it here.
Okay.
And then we can continue on with our the rest of
and I don't care who hears about it because I'm very anti-HIPAA myself, so I don't really care.
Well, it's a great question. Just to keep with our policy, I'm going to just stop the recording here and then we'll upload the class. It will be available for people to rewatch or share with others who weren't able to attend. Give me a few hours. It takes a little while for it to upload. All right.